Hello and welcome to the first episode ever of our weekly video podcast, The Remainder. Today we're going to be talking about telescopes and stars. When I turned 8, my parents bought me a telescope for my birthday. I was so excited to unbox it. It had a map of the moon, a star chart, a whole bunch of lenses with different magnifications, and it even had a filter that I could look at the sun with. I put it all together and stood back and admired it, my beautiful red telescope. But after about 20 minutes, the excitement wore off and I wasn't very excited about my telescope anymore. It wasn't until my father that night taught me how to view stars through my telescope that I got excited. I had made a fundamental shift. The first 20 minutes I was focusing on the telescope. That evening, I was focusing on the stars and using the telescope to view the stars. At first, I was looking at the lenses. At the end of the night, I was looking through the lens. Sadly, from time to time in our e-learning world, we spend a lot of our time admiring the telescope and not taking the moment to look through the telescope to the stars. When we build e-learning, we focus too much on the E and not enough on the learning sometimes. What do I mean by that? Sometimes we build activities for the sake of the activities. That's like giving everyone a telescope to own without actually looking through it to see the stars. So let's be the first to put our foot down and just say no to activities for activity's sake and make sure the activities support the learning we want them to support. The whole purpose for e-learning is to learn and to teach, not to have an activity. The great educator and writer Sybil Marshall said, quote, "Education must have an end in view, for it is not an end in itself," end quote. I'd love to modify that a little bit and say activities, games, interactions, and simulations, they should all have an end in view, and they are not ends in themselves. A telescope is only as good as the objects you can see through it. And an activity for learning is only as good as the learning that it supports. Activities can even have great learning behind them, but if it's the wrong type of learning, it's not strengthening the purpose of our WBT in the first place anyway. So what does this look like in real life when we focus on the telescope and not on the stars in our e-learning? Let's take an example and say we're going to teach a class on how to tie your shoes. We've got the background story, we've got our characters, we've even got the color of our characters' shoelaces for this WBT. In order to keep this exciting and engaging, we've decided to add a drag and drop activity. Too often we say, hey, this looks great, it's interactive, it's fun, it deals with shoelaces, we're good to go. But we need to stop and ask ourselves the question, why are we doing this? It's a cool activity, but does being able to drag Velcro shoes into a pile help someone actually be able to tie their shoes? No, it doesn't. It has an instructional purpose, but it doesn't align to our original intent for this WBT, which is to learn how to tie shoes. So it may be fun, it may be interactive, and you may wow your client and even the learner who's really excited about it. But in the end, we're wasting precious brain power on an activity that doesn't even matter for the end result. Remember, you're competing with phone calls, IMs, emails, and other distractions. And you only get a little bit of their attention. So let's make sure we focus it on exactly what matters instead of on what's attractive or fun or engaging for the sake of being attractive, fun, or engaging. So take a moment to think about the WBTs that you're working on. Are your activities tied to sound instructional objectives, to the end goal? Or are they activities for the sake of activities? So why do we do this? We all know better. I think there are 4 reasons that we do this. The first reason is because our main deliverable on every WBT is the WBT itself loaded in the LMS and assigned to people. Unfortunately, I think that's a little bit of a flawed way to look at this. That's when we say the project's done, it's delivered, people are taking it. But is it really done? All of the instructional design models that I know of have an evaluation component of them, usually at the end, where we evaluate if the learning objectives were met or not. And I think it's easy for us to lose sight of what really matters, and that's the learning objectives, not that the WBT is in the LMS and that people are able to take it. The second reason we fall for this trap is because, let's face it, 99% of our time building these is in the software building it, and that's where our focus is. That's where we have the most control. So we need to take a step back from there, and even though the majority of our time is there, we need to look beyond that at our learners. The third reason we fall for this trap is because it's really difficult to actually measure if they know something or not. Sure, we can build knowledge checks and little interactions and quizzes in there, but a month later, 2 months later, 3 months later, do they have the knowledge, yes or no? We don't really know because we don't evaluate that. The fourth reason that we do this is because we've either failed to establish learning objectives or we've completely abandoned them altogether. I'd like to focus on this fourth point, learning objectives. This is the best way that we can evaluate our current WBTs to make sure they're impactful. Go through each slide and ask yourself, what on face value learning objective does this support? In the example of our Velcro shoes case, it supports the learning objective of students being able to visually distinguish between Velcro and laced shoes. That has nothing to do with actually tying the knots. So while it has a learning objective, it's not aligned and we should remove it. So this is your challenge. Go through your WBTs and on every single slide, ask yourself, what is the purpose of this slide? Why is this activity here? Go back and look at your original objectives. Did you build your activities from the objectives? Or did you build your activities first and then you try to shoehorn your objectives into the activity and they don't fit? Every single element of our WBTs need to be supporting learning objectives. If they're not supporting them, they're fluff and they're wasting our learners' brain power and time, and we should remove them. So let's practice real quick. Let's say we're teaching a class on tying your shoes. And our instructional objective is, by the end of this class, learners will be able to tie an overhand knot, which is the first step of tying your shoes. So then what kind of activity would we have? Don't worry about if it's drag and drop or a simulation or a matching game. Don't worry about that. The form doesn't matter. What matters is the function. The function should be something that practices tying that knot. So if it is a drag and drop, maybe you drag the strings over each other. Maybe you click on the picture that's the right way doing it. Maybe they have a piece of string in front of them and they can practice it and evaluate it. There's all sorts of ideas, but you need to start with the objective first, not the activity. So in summary, we need to be focusing on the stars, not on our telescopes. Good instructional design focuses on objectives. Whether you're building a WBT or an OJT or a live class, it's all the same. So if you've been building ILT your whole life and you're baffled by this e-learning thing, it's no different. It's not about drag and drops, it's not about hyperlinks, it's about learning and providing activities that align with instructional objectives to help our learners learn. Albert Einstein said, "Education is what remains after one has forgotten what one has learned in school." And that's why I've decided to name this podcast The Remainder, because we should be focusing on what remains after these people complete their e-learning, after they have credit in the LMS, and 6 months later when they're doing their job, what remains is what we put there, and we need to be building with that in mind. This podcast is only as good as your comments, and we need your comments below. Do you agree with this? Do you disagree? Have you seen examples? Do you have other ideas on how we can get away from focusing on the telescope and more on the stars? And future episodes will be coming up and addressing more of your concerns. So if there's a topic that you struggle with e-learning and you'd like to have addressed, put it in the comments below and we'll see it in a future episode of this podcast.